An open response to John Armstrong. So I find myself, once again, addressing a multitude of falsehoods and absurdities issued by John Armstrong in his latest video. So without the fanfare of my last offering, I'm going to dismantle his most important arguments one at a time. His first argument is a lesson, what he deems a lesson, in my supposed logical fallacies. The first claim is the ad hominem, where he claims that a bulk of my arguments have been spent attacking him personally, or attacking those who provide the facade of a scholarly basis for his view of history. But he seems completely ignorant of the fact that in order for ad hominem to be a fallacy, the argument has to be used in order to establish the truth. I.e., I would have to be saying that John is a crackpot, therefore his assertions are false. But this has never been a part of my argument. Let's agree up front that making accurate assertions about a person or that person's positions is not ad hominem, nor is making said statements without the intent of those statements disqualifying the person's positions per se. My argument has never been that John is a crackpot, therefore the assertions that Christ never existed are false, but rather to rightly say that his position is one of demagoguery, which simply means that he has taken a complex issue and explicitly reduced it in order to exploit that simplicity for self-aggrandizement. He makes absurd demands of ancient history and then passes those demands on to modern people who, being more inclined to modern history, are bamboozled by the demands which seem to fit with their conceptions of what modern history demands. But this is not true. As practically any ancient historian can tell you, there is a vast chasm of difference between what is acceptable in terms of ancient history and what is acceptable in terms of modern history. Case in point, this argument is a logical fallacy, just one of John's. It's called a straw man. His second claim is the appeal to authority, which is simply a claim that I'm taking the position that the majority of historians agree with an historical Jesus, therefore an historical Jesus is true. This is another straw man on his part. I have never argued that a majority of historians necessarily equals true. What I have argued is that the evidence to support an historical Jesus is good enough to convince lots and lots of people who know far more about the subject than he does, and that does necessitate one's consideration. His next ploy is to produce books by whom he deems reputable historians, to rebuff the notion that almost all historians disagree with him, and that's a true statement. The books he produced are as follows: Incredible Shrinking Son of Man by Robert Price, Jesus Mysteries by Frick and Gandy, The Christ Conspiracy by D.M. Murdoch, Lost Christianities by Bart Ehrman, The Jesus Puzzle by Earl Doherty. Now, of this group, the only reputable scholar is Bart Ehrman. Robert Price is a member of the Fringe Jesus Seminar, and it's no wonder that he publishes under Prometheus, an anti-theist group from way back. Would it surprise anyone that a publishing house which prints wholly, universally, and only books which support secular humanism would print a book of questionable scholarship regarding a mythical Jesus? It shouldn't. Frick and Gandy are laughed at by the historical community, literally they are laughed at, as ideologues, and in regards to their book, The Jesus Mysteries, David Allen Dodson, a non-biased, non-Christian reviewer for CNN, stated that, quote, while the authors discuss many examples of elements of Osiris Dionysus in the Jesus story, they virtually ignore the more direct ties to the Jewish tradition and prophecy. This oversight undermines the credibility of many of their arguments, and this is the kicker, listen, and could have the tendency to mislead the novice reader on the subject. And mislead is what those who hold this position do so often. The Christ Conspiracy by D.M. Murdoch is published by Adventures Unlimited. This is a publishing company that publishes books on the Bermuda Triangle, crystal power, Ramtha, and other New Age theology. Earl Doherty's book, The Jesus Puzzle, is published by Canadian Humanist Publications. This is another publisher like Prometheus, which concentrates wholly, entirely, on the advancement of humanism and the diminishing of religion, particularly Christianity. So none of John's reputable scholars managed to publish under an impartial press, like Oxford or Harvard or Random House or Penguin, except Bart Ehrman. His book, the book he held up, which is Lost Christianities, is published by Oxford Press. This is a non-biased publishing house and one that a person can have more confidence in than the others. What does Bart Ehrman have to say about an historical Jesus? This is a quote from Ehrman's book entitled Jesus, Apocalyptic Prophet of the New Millennium. This is Bart Ehrman's book, a book that John held up as an example of Jesus myth scholarship. This is a quote from his book. Quote, "The model of Jesus as an apocalyptic prophet is the best lens with which to understand the life of the historical Jesus and the history of the movement that continued as his legacy. This explicitly accepts the notion of an historical Jesus. Even one of his authors that he holds up accepts an historical Jesus. In fact, the only one of his authors who has any reputability at all in the historical community actually is a historical Jesus guy. It's uncanny that a book John holds up as an example of Jesus myth scholarship actually agrees with me. As a final consideration regarding this topic, perhaps the most odious part is what's absent from it. John's demands that the experts must support their positions with evidence in order for their positions to be considered true or likely. That sounds good on the surface, but he makes no such demands of the Jesus myth crowd. I'm still waiting for him to offer something other than his theological perspective on my myth challenge. He has offered nothing apart from that. Apparently his perspectives and the perspectives of the Jesus myth crowd are simply above such trivialities.